Hello, this is Dr. Harrison, coming to you from the Institute of Advanced Studies in Religion and Philosophy, also known as my man cave. I am joined here today by the Dean of the Institute, Emma the Airedale. Say hello, Emma. Oh, well, must be her break. Now, this week we are looking in Old Testament at the reign of Solomon. Solomon was the son of David and Bathsheba. He was not the one that was naturally in line for becoming the next king, and yet he does, and mostly through some intrigue and other things. Once he becomes king, the thing that he does is he gets rid of all of his rivals, anyone that might have a say or a legitimate claim to the kingship. He gets rid of them. Very astute political move, but not what we usually think of in Solomon. Solomon was known as the wisest of the kings. Wisdom was very important in Eastern thinking. He was seen as one of the wisest kings, so much so that he gets a visit from a beautiful lady down south by the name of the Queen of Sheba. And there is ancient legends that they had a child together, and there is a very curious relationship between Israel and Sheba after this point. He was a speaker, a preacher, a collector of proverbs, a writer. He organized things very well. He did a very good job of building projects. He built the temple, first temple, but the problem is he was not very good with money or wives. And this eventually leads to the demise of his kingdom. And some people believe that Ecclesiastes, which we'll look at later, was written in this background of when he was feeling very down about the fact that he had to sell parts of the kingdom for that. So even though we think of him as being very wise, he wasn't wise at all things. As I mentioned, he built the temple, dedicated the temple, and it became the central the central idea of power and religious worship in all of Israel when he does this. But he does a lot of other things. He builds several places where his army would go as lookouts. He built roadways through so commerce could come through, and that's how he builds his kingdom. Not by might like David did, but he built it by commerce. Now, he starts what will later become the division of Israel. There will be a northern kingdom and southern kingdom. He does it, one, by using slavery and indentured servitude, which causes some social unrest. He has a large harem of women, about 1,000 women, which came from foreign gods. Now, quite often marriages back then were contracts. And so you would marry someone's daughter or sister or something as a contract with those people. And Solomon did a lot of that, and a lot of them brought their own foreign gods into the place as well. And this sort of brings rebellion into the nation later, particularly in the northern kingdom. Now Solomon will die after about 40 years. He writes a great bit, and his son Rehoboam becomes king and has to face a lot of issues that are left by his father. This excessive taxation, the slavery issue, and also all the foreign gods that he allowed into the land. And what happens is the nation is divided at this point. There is a northern kingdom called Israel and a southern kingdom which becomes known as Judea. Now we're going to look first sort of at the northern kingdom to sort of try to understand how it differs. Now, northern tribes decide they're going to elect their own king, and they elect Jeroboam. Jeroboam is not from a kingly family. The northern kingdom became much more secular in some ways because it was who had power and who was willing to kill to become king in the northern kingdom at this point. He did help the northern kingdom somewhat. The northern kingdom actually was the stronger of the two kingdoms. It was stronger economically, it had a larger population. It controlled many of the major roads that came through. It had the best land as well, and probably had a stronger government system than the southern kingdom to begin with. And so Jeroboam begins his reign, and as he does that, we see the succession of kings that come after him. Some died naturally, some were killed, some were murdered, some committed suicide, and this is the way that the tribal system of the Middle East pretty much worked. But eventually a king rose named Omri, and Omri would take control of the kingdom, and he would also begin a lineage of sons and grandsons that would become kings that brought some stability. Now Omri was known in that part. We know from other countries that Omri was a good king, a strong king. He was referred to, in fact, that's one of the ways that we know that Solomon actually existed. But we also know that now, because archaeology has found some of his building projects, but there was at one time some question whether Solomon actually existed. But we know now that Omri and Solomon existed. Now they were taken under as a vassal by the Syrians. The Assyrians became a very strong nation, and they would come down south, and they sort of took Israel under their wing, and Israel would pay them tribute, and they would leave Israel alone. During this time, the son of Omri, Ahab, becomes king. He marries the Phoenician princess by the name of Jezebel. Jezebel was a worshiper of Baal, which is a Phoenician Canaanite god. He began building projects of his own. And during this time is when we see the rise of something very curious in the Old Testament called the prophets. The prophet Elijah comes along, and he is the symbol, the epitome of prophets from this day on. And he creates a school called the School of Prophets. And he and Jezebel and Ahab have this strong confrontation that takes place. Elijah ends up killing many of the prophets of Baal, and this does not make him very ingratiated to the king. And there is sort of a hit put out on him, and eventually he is said to have left or gone up to heaven on a chariot of fire. And his replacement was a gentleman by the name of Elisha. And eventually Elisha gives a prophecy that there will be a death, and we see Ahab and Jezebel dying at this point. Now, after this point, there are these consistent, violent purges of kings in the northern kingdom. One right after another. None of them really rise up to rival the kingdom of Omri. There were times that they would actually work with Judea in order to fight the Assyrians or others. This didn't always work well for either one of them. And eventually, when they decided that they were not going to pay their tribute any longer to the Assyrians come down in 732, 722, and they destroy the northern kingdom. And those 10 tribes are taking off, and they become known as the lost tribes of Judah. Lost tribes of Israel, I'm sorry. Lost tribes of Israel. And there have been a lot of theories on what happens to the tribes of Israel. And these theories, some of them are pretty interesting, and one of them that was very interesting but always thought to be legend, turns out that it might have more truth to it than any of the others. Okay, this is just a short synopsis of the Northern Kingdom and what took place. Next week we'll be looking at the Southern Kingdom. So I will see you then.